tempted to ask you to do that again so Peter can get a bit more. Just warming up to. We're going to try this clicker again today. Oh, wow, it is working. We're going to look at Psalm 46. And the reason we're going to look at Psalm 46 is, do you know what day it was on Friday? Some of you do. I think Saturday was All Saints' Day, but what comes before All Saints? Reformation Day, that's right. I knew Steve would get it. So it was Halloween, but it's also Reformation Day on the 31st of October. Surprisingly, apart from my kid walking about as Alexander Hamilton, I didn't see anybody dressed in that kind of get-up. There were no little Martin Luthers running around the streets of Muirton on Friday night. So the reason we're doing Psalm 46 is based on, it's written by Luther. It's the words, he wrote a song called Ein feste Burg, which is a strong tower, and it's based on the words of Psalm 46. So we're going to look at Psalm 46 for no other reason than it was Reformation Day on Friday, as well as Halloween. So join with me, Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Selah means pause, so we're pausing. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Just a little interesting bit that I haven't noticed before. I've always thought that the be still was for us. And we've got songs, haven't we, where we sing Be Still and Know That I Am God. It's a great favourite of Christians. But one of the guys who commented on this psalm said, God is not actually telling you as Christians or as believers to be still. He's talking to those at war. He's saying to those at war, be still and know that I am God. Now, maybe you don't interpret it that way, but I thought it was interesting. I'm having one of those days. Do you recognise the picture? It was on the news quite a lot recently. I don't know many people who have been in a hurricane. I think Kieran might have been. Is that right? You're in a proper hurricane. And a friend of mine and colleague Martin Fair put up on Facebook this week that he was safe in Hurricane Melissa. And it's the only person I knew that had to put up that they were safe during that horrendous hurricane. This psalm begins by talking about the mountains falling into the sea and about the waters boiling. Probably not a hurricane, but certainly creation out of control. We're told to be still and trust in God as our refuge and strength in the midst of horrific environmental catastrophe. It sounds a lot more like landslides or earthquakes, doesn't it? Or, magma or lava coming up to boil the water. And the Jewish people were not, this was not unknown to them. My understanding is that the Jordan Valley is a big rift valley, and so you would get earthquakes based on those plates moving. They were also not simply concerned with the environment. Whenever you hear about the sea or the waters in a psalm or any Old Testament writing, then you're also supposed to think back to God bringing order and chaos. We're told at the beginning, in the creation story, which we happily heard a little of today. We're told that God spoke and he brought order over these chaotic waters. Now, why were there waters there before creation? Well, the waters are to the Jewish people, to the Israelites, a sign of chaos. They were landlubbers. They were not a great community of seafarers, which is why stories like Jonah or Paul's voyages are very interesting. And out of the sea came all kinds of monsters of chaos. And when God spoke in creation, he brought calm and order, and he separated the waters and made them safe. So this psalm, as well as thinking about environmental catastrophe that they had seen, is thinking about God speaking into the primordial waters of chaos and bringing peace. The story of Jesus, where he calms the storm, is probably meant to make us think of that. It's not just amazing that Jesus can speak to the waters. It's that here is the one who embodies the Creator, who separates the water from the land, who is able to bring stillness to chaos. And so the first section of the psalm up to the pause is about God's authority and trustworthiness, that we can find refuge in him in the midst of environmental chaos. Do you have a picture of refuge and strength? Is there a place that you find safe? Places of safety probably mean something different in the 21st century. But do you think of, is there any image or any situation where you remember, maybe as a child, that made you feel safe? A lot of mine surround my dad. I'm not a big man, I've not even got big hands now, but I remember as a child putting my hands into my dad's kind of shovel-like hands and feeling safe because they were enclosed in his big hands. I think about other images I have in my mind of feeling secure would be in the swimming pool with my dad, when I'd feel slightly nervous. I also did some really stupid things in swimming pools. Any very young children here? I told you this one before. So me and my brother both think it was us that did this. Maybe we were both stupid and did it. But once I put my armbands on my feet to see what would happen. Yeah, you're smart and you knew what would happen. And I'd like to think it's the only time I've actually met an angel, because someone came from nowhere and lifted me by the feet and put me the right way round. Otherwise, you'd have a different minister today. So, yeah, Ali says it was him, but I'm certain it was me that this happened to. Why was I telling you that story? Yeah, but I think of, in the swimming pool, I think of grabbing hold of my dad when I was like nervous or scared in the water and feeling safe. The other one is, we used to have these really terrible old cars, the kind that burnt your legs in the summertime because they got so hot in your shorts. Yeah. And my dad spent every weekend under the car. So we drove these bangers, which he worked all week. Then he came home and spent the entire weekend in his boiler suit putting the car back together so it would make another week. But I have this distinct feeling of security sitting in that car with the rain pelting down, eating a chippy, and everything steaming up in the windows and feeling totally safe and secure with the storm outside. So where do you picture to feel safe? If we had to do some kind of visualization thing now, what would you picture? Because God is saying to the people in the psalm, I am your place of safety, that the entire world can be collapsing round about you, but you will be safe with me. So safety in times of environmental chaos. Oh, come on. It's all the spoilers now. There we go. The second verse, so between the pauses, talks about this city. Now, it says there's a city that a river makes it glad. So there's a city that the river makes glad. Let me get the text so I don't start making things up. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, she will not fall. God will help her at the break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress. One suggestion for where this text comes from is in relation to the Jerusalem being surrounded by the Assyrian army. And the Syrians seemed to be going to overrun the city. And then for some reason they turned back and left. And obviously the people felt this great sense of security and victory. So one possible interpretation of this verse is to do with Jerusalem and the safety that city provided. However, if you're really into the Psalms, there are some Psalms that are about Jerusalem. They were meant to do with going up to the temple to worship, and the scholars fight about it, and it seems that this Psalm might not actually be about that. So there's some question over whether this is really about actual Jerusalem or not. And one suggestion is that we might be talking more about a heavenly city, which is why there's a picture here of the city from Revelation. So this may be about Jerusalem, but it seems a little bit different from the normal Psalms about Jerusalem. So where is this city? Now, if you want to switch off for the next 30 seconds, that's okay, because I'm going to talk about the Canaanites and Ugaritic for a second. And it's obviously not my specialist area, but you might find it interesting. I will try and click my fingers when you have to come back in if you don't like this bit. But in the Old Testament, there are different names used for God. Yahweh is God's actual name, like my name is Dave. But he also has titles. So in the same way that we would say God, there are other words used, and one of those words is El. There's another word used for Lord, which is Adonai. Okay, so there's these different names are used, and we could go into huge detail about that, but we won't. El is used across the ancient Near East. So it's not just used by the Jews, it's used all over the ancient Near East. So the Canaanites would use a word very similar, and as would all the different groups of people all over. Now what's interesting about this is the Lord of Hosts is hardly ever said, apparently, and it actually may relate to a Canaanite phrase. And when it's used in terms of the Old Testament, one of the places it's used is to do with the priest king called Melchizedek. And I find him a fascinating character, and we have spoken at length about Melchizedek before, because Melchizedek comes out of nowhere. Abraham bows before Melchizedek and gives him honor. But we don't know who Melchizedek is. And he is a just king or a righteous king or a king of righteousness, which is interesting. So Christians, if you look into the book of Hebrews, Christians have really connected with Melchizedek. And we have tended to think that this might be the Lord himself, Jesus, a pre-incarnate or God incarnate, come to meet with Abraham all those years before. Now he's the king of Salem. And again, as you'll probably guess, scholars tend to fight about this, but some scholars think that Salem is Jerusalem. Okay? So if you think back to it, what excites me, I'm getting goosebumps, you might not be, what excites me about this is, can you imagine that even before God reveals himself to the Jews, God is already represented. God is already represented. And there's an ancient Near Eastern story about the city where the Lord of Hosts lived. And it's supplied by these two rivers. Okay? Now, what I am not saying is that the Canaanites worshipped the Lord of Hosts or knew what they were doing. But isn't it interesting that even outside of God's revelation to Abraham and his children, there's some kind of understanding of this God, this Lord of Hosts, who the Bible identifies as Yahweh. The Canaanites don't necessarily know his actual name. They don't know him, but they've heard rumors of this king. And where Melchizedek comes from. But isn't it incredible? Now, occasionally you meet people who've come to faith in Jesus Christ and they learnt about him in a dream. They'd never had the chance to read the Bible, but God somehow revealed himself. And isn't it interesting when God goes outside of the normal parameters and reveals himself to people? But what this psalm shows us is that if there's any truth to this Lord of Hosts being the God of Melchizedek, coming from the city of peace or from Salem, if there's any truth to that, isn't it interesting that the Bible, the greater revelation in the Jewish scriptures is that this Lord of Hosts is Yahweh himself. He is greater than any other king, any other being, is the Lord of Hosts, whose celestial city, whose heavenly city is supplied by this river. That was me trying to clip my fingers. Right, so come back. If you were totally bored with that, doesn't matter, we're back on track. The point is, we've got this picture of security in creation, and now we have this picture of security in a heavenly city, in a city which even under siege God will protect, and his voice will sound and he will melt the earth. Hold on, I've lost my clicker. And lastly, the third verse combines all of this, and it has God, or the third, you call it a stanza more, wouldn't you? After the second pause, the last section talks about God bringing the end of war. God will make war cease to the ends of the earth. He will break the bow, shatter the spear. He will burn the shields with fire. He says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And so the Israelites are told that they can have safety and security with God in environmental catastrophe. They can have safety and security with God in this heavenly city, which is where they can withstand or hold against their enemies. And then finally, that these enemies one day will be overcome, that God will cause war to cease. One day there will be peace when the world will be told to be still and to acknowledge that He is God. There's a difficulty with this psalm to know what the historical context is. We had a meeting earlier this week with other ministers in training, and one of the things we were talking about was making sure you start with the historical context in the Old Testament, because if I go straight to, well, this is what it tells us about Jesus, some people will be disappointed that I haven't talked about why it was written in the first place. And quite often you can tell why a psalm was written. So some of the psalms were written to be sung on the way up to the temple or in the temple, that kind of thing. It's quite hard to place this psalm. It's a little bit too cosmic. It's quite hard to work out perhaps some of it is to do with the Assyrians, perhaps some of it's to do with Jerusalem, but it's not entirely sure. And one of the reasons is that the Jewish people went through so much turmoil. Because we have the Hebrew Scriptures, we can look at the Old Testament and see they were constantly at war. They were constantly beaten. They were constantly in struggle. So which particular event we're talking about, we're not sure. Instead, this is one of the Psalms that has almost universal appeal. And I wonder, I used a picture of Gaza at the end there just to try and connect with what's happening right now. But I wonder if you've been able to connect with all of the events in the world through these different passages. As I said, we've witnessed Hurricane Melissa, but I've got an app to track hurricanes all the time. All around the earth, there is constant turmoil in creation. All around the earth, there are cataclysmic events. Probably every single week, certainly every month, chaotic things happen that bring horror and fear into people's lives. A constant source of anxiety and outrage is the environment as a concept itself. Environmental destruction or degradation. People vary on their response to it, but you can't really go a day without being faced with concern about the environment. So is it possible for us to feel security? I'm not saying complacency, but to feel security and trust and refuge in God in the face of that? Can we as Christians be concerned about our context and yet at the same time not be terrified? I watched a film a few years ago with DiCaprio in it and other people about people ignoring climate destruction, and then at the end they all die. So it was a Hollywood apocalyptic about the environment. In the face of these stories and these narratives, are we able to be confident in our faith and trust, even at the same time as changing how we live and trying to have a smaller impact on the globe? Are we able to trust God at the same time and not buy into the apocalyptic that's around us? You don't have to look far for concern about war right now, do you? War is always with us. It's not a new thing. I've told many times about the old scholar that preached in my church after 9/11 who pointed out that the natural state of humanity is war, not peace. Whereas we tend to, in our part of the world, we tend to think that mostly it's peace with the odd war. I found it recently, he stole it from Augustine. I've been quoting him for years, and then I found out somebody else said it before him. But the point is, we are painfully aware of it, but all around the globe, almost at all times, there is conflict and war. But right now, obviously, there's quite a heightened anxiety in Western Europe for the first time. So think about the first time in years, I mean, obviously not the first time in recently. So we are anxious again about global conflict, about the possibility of things kicking off. We are anxious about the potential for civil war in America or fighting on our streets. We're painfully aware of conflict and heightened tension. Are we able to trust God in the midst of this? Are we able to trust God in the midst of our anxieties, of chaos? Psalm 46 is ultimately all about God's authority and trustworthiness in times of chaos. Are we able, as Christians, to trust him when these seem very real to us? Interestingly, the New Testament shows that it's Jesus Christ who brings every nation under God's authority. It's before we find out in the New Testament, it's before Jesus Christ that every knee will bow. We also hear in Paul that all of creation is waiting for those who are followers of Christ to be revealed. So God's plan for implementing his trustworthiness in Psalm 46 is that he will come himself in Jesus Christ and he will bring order again in his kingdom. In God's kingdom, he will bring order in all kinds of chaos. Strife, conflict, even environmental chaos. All of it will be brought under the authority of Jesus Christ. And so as Christians, we certainly have an answer, the answer to how might we live in the midst of chaos and still trust God. God has shown his faithfulness in his Son. If he will be faithful through Jesus Christ, we can trust that he will be faithful in environmental chaos, in national chaos, in global conflict. But I want to finish with this. These are all huge concepts, aren't they? Global chaos, environmental degradation, wars between nations, the disintegration of whole societies are all huge concepts. And I find it quite easy to say that I trust God in them. I'm not sure if I do, but I find it quite easy to say. I find it quite easy to say, well, you know, in the face of conflict very far from home at the moment, or in the face of chaos prophesied in the future, yes, I can trust God. He is capable, he is able. But if I can trust God with these huge things, can I trust him with the medium and the small things? Because they're a bit closer to home, aren't they? We've gone extra large. I can trust God in the face of climate change and global degradation, but can I trust God with the little medium things? I mean, I'm concerned about World War III. I'm concerned about chaos in Ukraine. I'm concerned about marches in London. But they're a little bit distant sometimes. And it's easy to say I trust God with them because they're not quite as close to home as they might be. But do I trust God with the security of my kids and my family? Do I trust God with the outcomes in their life? Do I trust God in the seemingly insignificant things that drive me insane? Yesterday, I went apoplectic because I couldn't log into Netflix properly. Not even joking. Proper meltdown. I mean, I had tried for quite a long time. And you know the story. You know, can I trust? I mean, I'm not saying I trust God to help me log into Netflix, but you see what I mean? In this beautiful state of trusting God with all the difficulties in my life, how come with the small things I go insane when they're so trivial? If I can trust God with global war, security, nuclear weapons, environmental degradation, and when I die, going to heaven. If I can trust God with that, why can't I trust God with not losing my mind over somebody stealing a parking space? How do I learn to trust God with the small and the medium? Now, I know from chatting to you guys, a lot of you guys have more faith than I do. And I'm not just saying that for you to go, no, Dave, surely that's not true. It's actually true. I know from sitting down with you that some of you have much more faith than I do, and you're much more trusting, and you don't worry about the same things, and that's fantastic. So maybe there's only a small group of us here who don't trust God enough. But if it's you, how do we get to the point of actually trusting God? Because I wonder, maybe we start from the wrong place. Does me starting with, God will see me through Armageddon and nuclear war, I can trust him with that. If I start there, do I naturally get to, I can trust God with the small things, or might I start with the manageable and the small and build up? And why is it that I find it easier with the big concepts than the little day-to-day things? I trust God, but I put an air tag on everything, including my kids. You see what I mean? Like I am worried to the extent of trying to secure all these small things around about me. I trust God with nuclear weapons, but the other day I was thinking, like, when the Church of Scotland falls apart and I get sacked, in whichever order that happens, I saw this big headline says, well, you've got no hope of getting a job when you're over 50. I was like, I know I'm unemployable as a minister anyway, but let alone because of what age I am. So do I trust God with that? Do I trust God with the future of Riverside? Do I trust that we will be preserved not just through nuclear war, but also through presbytery planning? Maybe you find it easier to say with integrity, I trust God. I don't. I know the right words. But how do I come to a place where I truly trust God with the smallest right through to the extra large? Where I truly can be at peace and feel that he is a refuge in every single thing that I am facing. And can I know I should, but can I see in the faithfulness of Jesus Christ that God will be faithful, that God was faithful and is faithful and was faithful in Jesus Christ? Can I trust that in the same way he will be faithful to me in all things? Because he's promised. Because he's promised. And he's shown himself to be trustworthy through his Son. Let's pray.